A single father's world collapses when ruthless gangsters snatch his daughter, but they just awaken to protect her with a hidden, deadly past. They took his child, but were they ready to face the Navy SEAL? The smell of grilled cheese and tomato soup usually meant everything was right in my small world. After-school snacks with Lily were sacred. We'd talk about her day, what wild adventures happened at recess, who she sat with at lunch. Her laugh was a melody I couldn't live without, a bright, pure sound that chased away any shadows left from my old life. Just being her dad felt like the biggest honor, a job I cherished more than anything I'd ever done before. I'd traded high-stakes missions for parent-teacher meetings and scraped knees, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Every drawing tacked crookedly to the fridge, every storybook read aloud, every whispered secret before bed. These were the treasures I protected. Life was simple, quiet, and perfect because she was in it. We had our routine, a comfortable rhythm that made me feel safe, like nothing bad could ever touch us here. I always made sure the doors were locked tight at night. Checked the windows twice, little habits from a time that felt like a lifetime ago, just background noise to the happy life we built. I remember walking through the front door that evening, calling out her name, "Lily, I'm home." The house was too quiet. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Usually, I'd hear her feet pounding down the stairs or her cheerful daddy echoing from the living room. Silence hung in the air instead, heavy and still. My heart did a funny little flip, a tiny jolt of unease I tried to shake off. Maybe she was just focused on her drawing, or maybe she fell asleep watching cartoons. I took a few steps inside, dropping my keys on the small table by the door. "Lilybug," I called out again, my voice a little louder this time. Still nothing. The quiet started to feel wrong, like a missing piece in the picture of our home. I walked into the living room. Her backpack was on the floor by the couch, her favorite teddy bear sitting propped up against a cushion like it was waiting for her. But she wasn't there. A cold knot began to form in my stomach. "Lily," I walked towards the kitchen, thinking maybe she went to get a snack. The back door was locked from the inside, just like I always left it. The kitchen was tidy, no half-finished snacks or spilled juice boxes. The knot in my stomach tightened. Okay, don't panic. Maybe she's just hiding. Kids do that sometimes, right? A game of hide and seek. I forced a smile to my face, trying to sound playful. "All right, Lilybug, I'm going to find you. Are you in here?" I checked the pantry, the space under the kitchen table. Empty. The silence in the house was starting to feel like a scream in my ears. My eyes darted around the room, searching, searching, searching. What could she be? I moved quickly now, the playful tone gone, replaced by a growing dread. Up the stairs, two at a time. Her bedroom door was slightly ajar. "Lily." I pushed it open. Her bed was made, her toys neatly put away in their bins. Everything was exactly as it should be, except she wasn't there. I checked her closet, under the bed, behind the door. Nothing. The house felt vast and empty, swallowing up my voice. My mind raced, trying to think of anywhere else a 7-year-old could be. The bathroom? I checked. Empty. The small attic access panel? Locked from the outside. No way she could get up there. Every corner of the house I checked confirmed the impossible. She wasn't here. The cold knot in my stomach had spread, turning into a block of ice. My hand started to tremble slightly, but my mind felt sharp, too sharp. It was already running through possibilities, analyzing the space, looking for anything out of the ordinary. Something felt deeply wrong. This wasn't just a kid hiding. This wasn't a neighbor who maybe took her out for ice cream without telling me. This was something else. My eyes scanned a living room again, slower this time, looking for details I might have missed in my initial frantic search. That's when I saw it. On the small table by the front door, right where I dropped my keys, was a piece of paper. It hadn't been there when I left that morning. My breath hitched. My hand shook as I reached for it. It wasn't a note written by Lily. The paper was rough, not the smooth kind she used for her drawings. The writing was messy, blocky letters, like someone was trying to hide their handwriting or wasn't used to writing much. My eyes scanned the few short lines, and the words blurred for a second as the blood drained from my face. It was short, brutal, and to the point. They had her. Someone had come into my home, my safe place, and taken my daughter. The world tilted on its axis. That quiet, perfect life I built shattered into a million pieces around me. My past, the one I'd buried so deep, felt like it was clawing its way back to the surface. Who would do this? Why Lily? She was just a child. She had no enemies, no connection to anyone who would want to hurt her. The note didn't ask for money. It wasn't a ransom demand. It just said they had her, and I was to wait for instructions. Wait? Every fiber of my being screamed to act, to move, to search, to find them. The police. I needed to call the police. My hand fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy as I dialed 911. The voice on the other end sounded calm, professional, asking questions that felt stupid and slow compared to the racing chaos in my head. Yes, my daughter is missing. Yes, there's a note. No, I don't know who took her. It felt like an eternity before they said officers were on their way. Standing there in the silent house, the note clutched in my hand, I felt a chilling mix of terror and something else. Something cold and hard. Something I hadn't felt in years. It was the feeling of a switch flipping inside me. The gentle father who read bedtime stories was still there, buried under layers of ice-cold resolve. They had taken the one thing I couldn't lose. They had shattered the peace I fought so hard to build. And a quiet voice from that buried past whispered a promise. I would get her back, no matter the cost. The front door siren wailed in the distance, growing louder, but a part of me already knew the police weren't going to be enough. Not this time. The house was suddenly full of strangers in uniform. They moved methodically, their voices calm but distant, like they were talking about someone else's life, someone else's nightmare. They asked me the same questions over and over. What time did I get home? Was anything else missing? Had I argued with anyone? My answers felt inadequate, small words against the enormity of what had happened. They took the note, carefully bagging it as evidence. They dusted for fingerprints, their brushes whispering against surfaces that just hours before felt safe and familiar. I watched them, a knot of frustration tightening in my chest. They were following the steps, the procedure, but it felt too slow, too removed. They couldn't possibly understand the urgency, the burning need to find her now. My little girl, out there with them. An officer, kind-faced but with tired eyes, sat me down and tried to explain what would happen next. They would issue an alert, talk to neighbors, check security cameras in the area. It all sounded so textbook, so ordinary. But this was the farthest thing from ordinary. This was my daughter. Every second that ticked by felt like a minute, every minute an hour. While they were busy with their protocols, my eyes kept scanning the room, revisiting every detail of the moment I found her gone. I needed to do something. Waiting felt like failure. My hands clenched into fists under the table. Years of training, of instinct, screamed at me to move. To act, not react. But the father part of me knew I had to let them try first. This was their job. The silence after the police left was deafening. My house, the place that was supposed to be our sanctuary, felt violated, empty. But seeing that symbol, the viper's mark, had done something strange inside me. It had quieted the screaming panic and replaced it with a cold, clear focus. Waiting for the police to follow leads, to navigate paperwork, felt like waiting for ice to melt in a blizzard. Lily didn't have that kind of time. Every second she was with them was too long. The image of her scared face fueled a fire in my belly, a fire I thought had burned out years ago. My mind wasn't thinking like a worried father anymore. It was calculating, assessing risks, planning. My feet carried me automatically towards the back of the house, to a part of the basement I rarely went to. It was behind a false wall in what looked like a storage area. To anyone else, it was just dusty boxes and old paint cans. To me, it was where I'd carefully hidden away the pieces of my previous life. Accessing it was simple, a sequence of movements that my hands remembered perfectly, even after all this time. A panel clicked open, revealing a small, dark space. Inside were things I swore I'd never need again. A sturdy metal box, a laptop that wasn't connected to the regular internet, and a few other items that looked harmless but were anything but. My fingers, steady now, went straight for the metal box. It wasn't locked with a key, but with a combination only I knew, a sequence of numbers tied to dates that meant something important to me. The box opened with a soft hiss. Inside, neatly organized, were things that felt both familiar and alien. Burner phones, small, specialized tools I hadn't touched in years, identification cards with my face, but different names, and a small, encrypted drive. Picking up the items felt natural, like my hands remembered their weight and purpose instantly. It was unsettling how quickly the dad persona could fall away, revealing the man I used to be. Next was the laptop. I set it up on a workbench, plugging it in. It booted up quickly, bypassing the normal starting screens and going straight to a black screen with a single blinking cursor. Typing in the codes to unlock, it was like remembering a forgotten language. My fingers flew across the keyboard, entering long sequences of letters and numbers that made no sense to anyone else. This laptop wasn't for checking email or watching videos. It was a doorway into a different kind of information, the kind of Vipers probably didn't even know existed. I needed to find out everything I could about their recent movements, their known locations, their habits. As the laptop hummed, loading secure programs, I changed my clothes. The jeans and t-shirt of a regular dad were replaced by darker, more practical clothing. Sturdy boots, pants with lots of pockets, a dark, plain jacket. Clothes that didn't stand out. Clothes that let you move without being seen. Looking at my reflection in a small, dusty mirror in the basement, I barely recognized myself. The worry for Lily was still etched on my face, but beneath it was something else, a sharpness in my eyes, a tension in my jaw, a readiness that hadn't been there hours ago. This was the man who operated in the shadows, the man who solved problems others couldn't. While the computer worked, I checked the other things in the box. A small, high-powered flashlight that could blind someone or show you things in the dark no other light could. A set of lockpicks, small and precise tools that could open doors without a key. These weren't things you learned from a hobby kit. They were taught for a purpose. Every item had a reason for being there, a potential use in the mission ahead. Because that's what this was now. Not just a desperate search, but a mission. The objective, recover Lily. The enemy, the Vipers. The stakes, everything. I took a deep breath, trying to push down the surge of emotion that threatened to overwhelm me. Thinking like this, acting like this, it felt wrong in the context of my quiet life with Lily. But it was the only way. The police were following trails I already knew were cold. They didn't know about the symbol, about the Viper's specific connection to my past. They couldn't move with the speed and, well, the ruthlessness that this situation required. My love for Lily was the engine, but the skills I had tried to forget were the tools I needed to drive. The laptop screen finally showed the information I needed. Maps, known associates, recent activity logs scraped from places the police would never look. The Vipers were messy, but they had patterns. They had safe houses, places they liked to hide out or conduct their business. The symbol they left wasn't just a calling card. It was a taunt, maybe even a sign they knew something about me. That thought sent a fresh shiver down my spine, but I pushed it away. Focus. I needed to focus on the information, not the fear. One location popped up more than others in their recent activity, an old industrial area on the edge of town, full of empty warehouses. A perfect place to keep someone hidden. That felt like my starting point. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of dread and grim determination. Leaving the house felt different this time. Not just leaving for work or to pick up groceries. This was leaving to go into the dark to hunt. The quiet suburban street looked exactly the same, but the world I was stepping into was a million miles away. I didn't take my regular car. It was too easy to spot. Instead, I used a different vehicle, one that blended in, parked a few streets over. It was old, plain, and registered under a name that wasn't mine. Driving felt like slipping back into a different skin, one that was used to being invisible. My eyes constantly scanned my surroundings, checking mirrors, noting other cars, looking for anything that seemed out of place. Old habits died hard, and right now I was grateful for them. My target was the industrial area, a maze of old brick buildings and chain-link fences. Finding the Vipers wouldn't be as simple as driving up and knocking on doors. They were careful, especially after taking someone. I needed to approach smart, use my knowledge of how groups like them operated. They'd have lookouts, maybe even camera systems, but they'd be relying on typical security measures. They wouldn't be expecting someone who knew how to see the unseen. I parked the car a good distance away, in a spot where it wouldn't be noticed, tucked behind some overgrown bushes. Moving on foot, I stayed in the shadows, using buildings and fences as cover. The air was thick with the smell of damp concrete and something metallic. Every step was measured. Every sound I made was controlled. I scanned the area, not just for people, but for signs of activity, fresh tire tracks, cigarette butts that hadn't been rained on, subtle movements in windows. I was looking for anything that suggested one of these empty buildings wasn't so empty after all. My senses felt heightened, sharper than they had been in years, picking up on faint sounds and smells that a normal person would miss. It was like my body remembered its purpose, shaking off the rust of civilian life. I moved around the perimeter of a few promising-looking warehouses, checking access points. Locks on some doors were old and rusted, clearly unused. Others showed signs of recent tampering or had heavy-duty padlocks that looked new. This was where I started leaving my own kind of message. Not a written note, but a different language they would understand eventually. A small, almost invisible cut on a fence that showed someone had been there. A tiny stone placed in a doorway crack that would fall if the door was opened, but looked like it had just been kicked there by chance. Little things that would tell them their security wasn't as good as they thought. I spent hours observing, waiting. The patience required was immense, a different kind of patience than waiting for Lily to finish her homework. This was the patient waiting of a predator, watching his prey. As darkness began to fall, lights started flickering on in one of the larger warehouses. Not many, just a few dim ones inside, barely visible through the grimy windows. Bingo, that was my target. Seeing proof they were inside sent a fresh wave of adrenaline through me, but I kept it in check. Getting emotional now would be dangerous. I needed to know more before trying to get inside. How many of them were there? Where they positioned? Were there patrols? Using a small, specialized camera I brought, one that could see in the dark and zoom in from far away, I carefully observed the warehouse. I could see figures moving inside sometimes, hear muffled voices. They seemed relaxed, maybe too relaxed. That told me they felt safe here. Good. That made them sloppy. I spent the next few hours gathering as much information as I could, mapping out their patterns, identifying potential entry points, and noting anything unusual. As the night deepened, I decided to leave a more direct message, just to let them know they were being watched. Not a threat, not yet, just a seed of doubt. I moved closer to the warehouse, finding a blind spot in their limited surveillance. Using a tool from my kit, I subtly tampered with a wire on one of their external power boxes, just enough to cause a brief flicker in their lights inside. Then, I quickly and silently retreated back into the darkness. It was a small thing, easily dismissed as a power surge maybe, but it would plant a question in their minds. Someone is here. Someone knows we're here. Who is it? They were about to find out messing with my daughter had consequences they couldn't possibly predict. They finished dusting and bagging, their work seemingly done for now. They promised updates, gave me a contact number, and slowly they filed out, leaving the house feeling even colder and emptier than before. The sterile scent of fingerprint powder hung in the air, a cruel reminder of their presence, and, somehow, their absence of immediate results. I was alone again, left with the silence and the terrifying reality. They were gone, but Lily was still missing. That's when I knew I couldn't just sit and wait by the phone. My feet started to move on their own, retracing my steps from when I first got home. Where had I looked? What had I seen? I walked back to the front door area, my eyes sharp, scanning everything with a different kind of focus now. Not the panicked search of a father, but the detailed scan of someone trained to observe, to find what others miss. I looked at the floor, the walls, the small table. The police had taken the note and dusted the obvious spots. But I remembered something from the brief story I read earlier, a small detail about a symbol near the windowsill. The window. I moved towards the window near the front door, the one that faced the street. It was a double-hung window, older style. I checked the lock. It was forced, splintered wood around the edges that the police must have noticed. But was there something else? I leaned closer, running my fingers along the bottom sill, then up the side frame. My fingers brushed against something tiny, rough against the smooth paint. I lowered my head, bringing my eyes closer. There it was, almost invisible, scratched lightly into the wood on the lower part of the window frame, just above the sill. A small, sharp symbol. It wasn't random. It wasn't a kid's drawing. It was a mark, a very specific mark. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at it. Recognition, cold and certain, washed over me. I knew that symbol. I knew exactly what it meant and who used it. It was the symbol of the Vipers. Seeing that mark felt like a punch to the gut, but also, strangely, like a jolt of adrenaline. The Vipers. I had crossed paths with them years ago, during a different life, a life I thought I'd left behind forever. They were a nasty piece of work, involved in all sorts of bad things. But why Lily? Why couple my daughter? It didn't make sense. Unless this wasn't random. Unless they knew who I was. The thought sent a fresh wave of fear through me, colder than the last. If they knew, this was personal. This was dangerous on a whole different level. And if they knew, they wouldn't be easy to fool. My mind was racing now, putting pieces together with lightning speed. The forced window, the note, the Viper's symbol. This wasn't a simple break-in. This was targeted. And the police, bless their hearts, weren't equipped for this kind of fight. This wasn't about catching a burglar. It was about dealing with a dangerous group who had just stepped into my world and taken the most precious thing in it. I looked back at the symbol, a tiny, innocent-looking scratch that held a terrifying meaning. They thought they were just kidnapping a single father's daughter. They had no idea who that single father really was. The decision solidified in my mind, hard and unyielding. I couldn't wait. I couldn't rely on others. This was my fight, my daughter, my responsibility, and I knew exactly where I needed to start looking. The world outside my quiet street suddenly felt a lot bigger and a lot darker. Watching the warehouse from a distance had given me a picture, but it wasn't the same as being inside. My stomach twisted thinking about Lily in there, scared, surrounded by these people. But that thought also hardened my resolve. I had a plan based on what I'd seen and what I knew about how the Vipers operated. They were tough, but predictable in their own way. They relied on strength and fear, not smart security. And their biggest weakness was that they believed they were safe inside their walls. They weren't ready for someone who knew how to get through walls. Getting inside was the next step, the most dangerous one yet. Every shadow felt like a hiding place, every distant sound like a warning. I decided to go in through a less obvious route. The main doors were probably watched, maybe even booby-trapped. The windows on the lower floors were too risky. The roof. That was my best bet. I had observed a section where the roof looked older, maybe weaker, and there was a water pipe running up the side of the building that I thought I could use to climb. It wasn't going to be easy, but easy wasn't an option anymore. I moved towards the back of the warehouse, where the shadows were deepest, staying low, using the piles of old crates and machinery for cover. The air here smelled like old oil and dust. Reaching the base of the water pipe, I tested it carefully. It was old, rusty, but looked strong enough to hold my weight. Taking a deep breath, I started to climb. It wasn't like climbing a ladder. It was a careful, slow process, finding handholds and footholds on the rough metal. My muscles remembered the movement, the balance, the quiet effort needed. Years of training had prepared me for moments like this, moments where your life depended on your ability to move silently and efficiently in the dark. Each foot placement, each grip of my hand was deliberate. Don't rush. Don't make noise. Just climb. Higher and higher I went, the ground shrinking below me, the vast, dark roof getting closer. Reaching the roof felt like a small victory, but the real work was just beginning. The roof was flat, covered in gravel, and littered with old vents and machinery. It was darker up here, the city lights far away. I moved across the gravel carefully, trying not to crunch too loudly. My eyes scanned the roof, looking for an entry point. A skylight, maybe, or a hatch. I found what looked like an old access hatch, covered in rust. Getting it open would be tricky. I pulled out a small tool from my jacket, a thin piece of metal designed for delicate work like this. It took a few tense minutes, working slowly, listening for any sound from below. The old metal groaned softly as I finally managed to unlatch it. Opening the hatch revealed a dark hole, smelling of stale air, and something else, something metallic and unpleasant. I couldn't see much below. I listened again, straining my ears. Voices, muffled but closer now, drifted up from somewhere below. They were definitely in here. My heart hammered against my ribs, but not from fear, from a grim anticipation. I lowered myself slowly through the opening, feet first, feeling for something to land on. It felt like dropping into the belly of a beast. The air inside the warehouse was cold and damp. I landed softly on something solid, lowering myself the rest of the way down. I was high up, maybe 20 feet above the floor, on a narrow walkway that ran along the inside wall of the warehouse. Below me, the space was huge and dark, filled with the shapes of stored goods, old equipment, and shadows. Lights were on in a section further away, casting long, eerie shadows. I stayed low on the walkway, moving slowly, silently, using the darkness and the clutter below for cover. Every creak of the metal under my weight, every scuff of my boots, sounded deafening in the quiet. My eyes constantly scanned the area below and in front of me, looking for any sign of movement, any guard. I moved along the walkway, making my way towards the section where the lights were on. The voices grew a little clearer as I got closer, rough and loud. They were talking, laughing. They sounded relaxed, comfortable. They clearly didn't think anyone could get in here. That confidence was their undoing. I reached a point on the walkway where I could see down into the lit section. It looked like a makeshift living area with some old couches, a table, and a few men sitting around, playing cards, smoking. They were armed, weapons visible. And just beyond them, in a separate, slightly darker corner, I saw something that made my breath catch in my throat. A small figure, sitting alone, looking small and scared. Lily, seeing her, even from a distance, sent a jolt of pure energy through me. She was okay, for now, but she was right there within my reach. The urge to just jump down and grab her was almost overwhelming, but I forced myself to stay put. Rushing in now would be suicide for both of us. I needed to be smart. I needed to wait for the right moment. I watched them, studying their movements, their positions, looking for an opening. They seemed distracted, careless. Maybe they had been up all night. This was my chance. I knew I had to get closer, find a way down without being seen. The air felt thick with tension. Just as I was planning my next move, a sound from below made me freeze. A door opened somewhere beneath the walkway, and footsteps sounded heavy and echoing in the large space. Two men walked out from the shadows below, heading towards the lit area where the others were. One of them stopped almost directly under the walkway where I was hidden. He stretched, looking up towards the high ceiling, his eyes scanning the dark space. For a terrifying second, I thought he saw me, but his gaze swept past. My body was frozen, every muscle locked, my breathing shallow. This was it. I was too close, too exposed if they decided to look carefully. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. There was no perfect moment, no easy way down. I had to make one. Acting on pure instinct, honed by years of practice, I moved. I dropped silently from the walkway, landing behind a stack of old crates near where the two men were standing. The landing was soft, controlled, barely making a sound. They didn't hear me. I was on the ground floor now, in the shadows, just yards away from two armed men who had no idea I was there. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum in my ears, but my mind was clear. 2 targets. Need to take them down quickly and quietly before they alert the others. I moved low and fast, using the crates as cover. The first man was still stretching, his back to me. The second was facing the other way, looking towards the lit area. Perfect. I lunged, closing the distance between me and the first man in 2 silent strides. My hand clamped over his mouth before he could yell, and with a quick, precise movement, I brought him down. He struggled for a second, surprised, then went limp. I gently lowered him to the ground behind the crates. 1 down. The second man must have heard a slight scuff or felt a change in the air because he started to turn. But I was already moving towards him. He barely had time to widen his eyes in surprise before I was on him. This time, it was faster, even more direct. Another quick, efficient movement, and he was down beside the first. Both dealt with, silent and out of the way. It was over in seconds, a blur of motion that felt both strange and deeply familiar. This wasn't how a dad was supposed to move. As I knelt there for a brief second, making sure they were both completely out, I heard a voice from the lid area. Tony? Frankie? You guys coming or what? Someone was expecting them. I didn't have much time. I quickly checked the two men, taking their weapons and anything useful they had on them. My eyes flicked towards the lit section, towards where Lily was. I had to get to her. I started to move from behind the crates, sticking to the deepest shadows, making my way towards the light. I hadn't gone more than a few steps when a figure rounded the corner from the lit area, looking annoyed. It was one of the men I'd seen earlier, a big guy with a scowl. He stopped when he didn't see Tony and Frankie. Hey, where'd those two go? He yelled into the darkness. He started walking towards where I was, his eyes squinting into the gloom. I melted further back into the shadows, becoming one with the darkness. He came closer, peering behind crates. He was almost right in front of the stack where I'd hidden the two unconscious men. His foot nudged against one of them, hidden from his view by the crates. He stopped, frowned. What the? He bent down, peering behind the crates. His eyes widened in shock as he saw his two buddies lying there. He started to yell, a loud, startled shout. Hey, what the hell? But I was already closing the distance. There was no time for stealth now. He was big and strong, but his surprise gave me an advantage. He swung a fist, but I easily dodged it, my body moving with practiced ease. I didn't fight him like you see in movies, with lots of big punches. My movements were smaller, faster, designed to disable. A strike to a pressure point, a twist of a joint. He grunted in pain, his tough guy act crumbling. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mix of pain and confusion. Oh, who are you? He gasped out, trying to fight back, but already losing. As I finished securing him, making sure he couldn't yell or move, his eyes, still wide, seemed to focus on something about the way I moved, the speed, the silent efficiency. A flicker of something, recognition or fear, crossed his face. He had seen something like this before. He knew this wasn't just some angry dad. He knew this was something else entirely. He knew they had messed with the wrong person. Taking down the last guy was messy, but necessary. There was no more hiding, no more quiet approach. They knew someone was here, someone who wasn't supposed to be. Their yells from the lit section of the warehouse told me they were finally figuring out something was very wrong. But I didn't hesitate. My only thought was Lily. I moved quickly from the shadows, heading towards the light, towards her. The warehouse was huge, filled with looming shapes in the dimness, but I knew the path I needed to take. Sounds of confusion and anger followed me, but they weren't fast enough. They hadn't expected this kind of pushback, this kind of speed. They thought they were in control. Bursting into the lit area, I saw them clearly now. 3 men, turning towards me, faces twisting in surprise and anger. And in the corner, huddled on an old blanket, was Lily. Her little face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Daddy!" she cried out, her voice small and shaky, and that sound fueled me more than anything else could. It gave me a final surge of strength, a singular focus. Get to her. Protect her. Standing in front of her, a cruel smile on his face, was the leader of the Vipers. I recognized him from old reports, a man named Victor. He was bigger than the others, with hard eyes and a scar across his cheek. He held a gun, pointing it not at me at first, but vaguely towards Lily. Well, he said, his voice rough, look what the cat dragged in. The ghost shows his face. Ghost? The word hung in the air, a strange name for a simple dad. He stepped forward, keeping the gun aimed. The other 2 men with him were starting to raise their own weapons, but they seemed unsure, looking at Victor, then at me, then back at the unconscious men scattered around the edges of the room that I had dealt with. The look on their faces told me the man from Act 6 had warned them. They knew this wasn't just a regular person they were dealing with. They looked scared. Good. Let her go, Victor, I said, my voice low and steady, different from the voice I used for bedtime stories. It was the voice I used when there was no room for mistakes. Your fight is with me, not her. Victor laughed, a harsh, grating sound. My fight is because of you, Ghost. He took another step, the smile fading, replaced by pure hatred. You took everything from me years ago. My brother, my crew. You ruined me. He gestured with the gun towards Lily. Now I get to return the favor. An eye for an eye, right? His words hit me like a physical blow. My brother? My crew? The Vipers. It clicked into place. Years ago, during a difficult mission, my team had taken down a dangerous group involved in moving weapons. There had been casualties on their side. Had his brother been one of them? He wasn't asking for ransom. This was about revenge. Twisted, cruel revenge using my daughter as a pawn. The twist wasn't about money. It was about my buried past catching up to me in the most brutal way possible. They didn't just kidnap a random kid. They kidnapped the daughter of the man who ruined their leader. Victor's eyes narrowed. You think you can just walk in here and take her? He spat, raising the gun more directly towards me. You think you're still that phantom from the stories? You're just a dad now. He motioned to the other two men. Get him. But his men hesitated, glancing at each other, clearly rattled by how quickly I had taken down the others. They had seen the result of my skills, even if they didn't understand where they came from. They were afraid. That hesitation was all I needed. In a flash, I moved. Not towards Victor directly, but a quick, sideways step that threw his aim off. The other two men finally reacted, starting to raise their guns, but I was already in motion, a blur of controlled power. I didn't use guns if I could avoid it, not with Lily so close. My hands were faster, more precise. One man went down with a cry of pain as I disabled his arm. The other tried to swing his weapon at me, but I blocked it, redirecting his force, sending him stumbling back into a pile of crates with a crash. Victor was left standing alone, the gun still in his hand, but his confidence shaken. He looked at his fallen men, then back at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying understanding. He saw the speed, the efficiency, the way I moved like nothing he had ever faced in his street fights. The ghost wasn't just a story. He was real, and he was standing in front of him, protecting his child. He finally understood who he had kidnapped from. The look on his face was pure, unadulterated fear. There was no time to finish things with Victor. Lily was the priority. With his men down and Victor momentarily frozen by fear and shock, I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran to Lily, scooping her up into my arms. She clung to me, trembling, burying her face in my shoulder. Daddy, she sobbed, her little body shaking. It's okay, Lily Bug, I whispered, holding her tight. I've got you. You're safe now. But we weren't safe yet. We were inside their base, and Victor wouldn't stay frozen forever. We have to go, Lily. Right now, I said, pulling her closer. I glanced back at Victor. He was starting to recover, his face contorted with rage, raising his gun again. The other two men were stirring, groaning. I couldn't deal with them all and protect Lily. Escape was the only option. I turned and ran, not back the way I came through the roof, but toward a different part of the warehouse I'd noted during my earlier observations, a service exit that looked like it led out to a less guarded area. Carrying Lily, I moved as fast as I could, navigating the obstacles in the dark warehouse. My eyes had adjusted to the low light, and my knowledge of the layout, however brief, helped. Lily was scared, but she was quiet, trusting me to get her out. Her little arms were wrapped tightly around my neck. Footsteps pounded behind us, shouts echoing through the vast space. They were coming after us. Victor wanted his revenge, and he wouldn't give up easily. We reached the service exit. It was a heavy metal door, locked from the inside, but it wasn't a complicated lock. Using a tool from my kit, the same kind I'd used for the hatch, I worked quickly, my fingers flying over the tumblers. Every second felt like an hour. I could hear them getting closer. The lock clicked open. I pushed the door open just enough for us to slip through, then pulled it shut behind us, hoping it would slow them down, even for a few precious seconds. We were outside, in a back alley behind the warehouse. It was dark, filled with overflowing dumpsters and the smell of decay. Not exactly a welcoming place, but it was freedom. I didn't stop running. Holding Lily, I ran down the alley, my boots pounding on the cracked concrete. I needed to get us away from the warehouse, away from this area, as fast as possible. My car was still parked a few streets away. That was my destination. Running with Lily in my arms was different from running alone. I had to be more careful, avoid tripping, make sure she wasn't getting hit by anything. She was still trembling, but she didn't cry out, didn't complain. She was so brave. My heart ached for what she had been through, what she had seen. How was I going to explain any of this to her? The quiet dad she knew had just disappeared, replaced by someone else. We reached the street where I'd left the car. It was still there, blending in with the other parked vehicles. Getting in, locking the doors, and starting the engine felt like the first truly safe moment since I'd found the note. I pulled away from the curb slowly, driving away from the industrial area, away from the vipers, away from the nightmare. Lily was quiet in the seat beside me, watching the streetlights pass. The immediate danger was over, but the effects of this night would stay with us forever. Looking at her, safe beside me, a wave of relief washed over me, so strong it almost made me pull over. I had done it. I had gotten her back. But the cost fell heavy. My past wasn't buried anymore. It had exploded into our lives. How could I go back to being just the quiet dad after tonight? How could I explain to her what happened, who I really was, without scaring her? The road ahead felt long and uncertain. Not just the road home, but the road of our lives together, forever changed by the night her dad stopped being just a dad and became the ghost.